This is my executive anti-axiom number 2, and it will be rather short because the PGA Championship's on. But it's the phrase "better to ask for forgiveness than permission," and this is one of the things that I kind of write down. It's a checklist of sorts when I'm initially involved with a company and I'm go to their front line, and it tells me a little bit about, well, actually tells me a lot about the organization. But I'll hear people use this phrase, better to ask forgiveness than permission, and it's indicative to me of a few things. One is executive over control. They've got to make sure that people aren't doing things that they aren't supposed to, whatever that means. And therefore, they have to have all these rules and policies and things that are very annoying to people when they have to be involved with a system like that. And anybody that's watched any of my videos or listened to my podcast, which more people listen to my podcast than on YouTube, but it's a scenario where people just say, it makes perfect sense to me. I'm going to go ahead and do it. Now, whether it is or not, it becomes a different question. But why are they in this situation? And so if there's this executive over control, then typically you're in an organization that ideas aren't solicited, or somebody's brought up an idea to an executive and it's been shot down or through the management chain, or it could be just the bureaucracy of between a frontline person and in the hierarchy of things. And they'll maybe go to their supervisor and say, I got an idea for this, and they're like, don't waste your time. It's not they don't want to know what ideas you have. You just need to grind out your work. And again, this is indicative of the top down decision making that's involved in the hierarchy of things. And so if your supervisor isn't allowed to come up with ideas and their manager isn't, and on you go, certainly you on the front line are not going to be allowed to change anything. And so people just say, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission, and go ahead and do something anyway. And it's unfortunate. It creates a culture where people are they're tired of it. I guess is the best way I can explain it. But you'll hear it on the front line quite a bit. And interestingly enough, when you do something, unless it really screws something up, most of the time manager doesn't even know. Especially the further up you go, they think it's running a certain way. They, being executives, think things are running a certain way, and you may have changed it on the front line for any of a number of reasons. And as I go through my system, first thing I do is I sit down and I'll listen to a lot of the interactions between that organization and customers, which obviously involves frontline people or salespeople or anybody that's interacting with customers. And it's very telling about how an organization is run. And after I've gone through and got a pretty good feel for, again, because I've done this with a number of organizations, that once I understand it, then I take an executive through So I want them to see, I want to see if executives are seeing the same things I am. And most of the time, yeah, probably 80 to 90% of the time, executives have never spent any time listening to the interactions of their front line. That's something they did in the old days when they first started. What do I need to do that for? But that's part of my system. So I'll take executives after I've listened for a while and said, okay, what are you hearing here? And I've got, questions that I have brought up based off of what I've learned. And, you know, so then I'll tow the executive to see if they're hearing the same types of things that I am. And then inevitably, and I'd say it's maybe 50-50, just depends on the type of leader the person is. They get very incensed when they think something is working a certain way, and then they find out that, oh, that's not the way it's working. I can tell you any number of occasions. Man, woman, doesn't make any difference. We basically, sit there and say, well, that's just not the way that it's done. They're doing it wrong. You love that. And it doesn't really, most of the time, it doesn't really become very difficult to unwind that. I usually have to preempt them before I sit down, because I never know. Sometimes I get a good feel for an executive, but the reaction is never quite what I think it is. So I always preempt an executive before you sit down and listen to customer interactions. That not to judge, just to listen, just to hear what's going on, and not just, but inevitably there will be a few that oh, why are you doing it that way? It isn't the way we taught you, type of thing. And the question isn't that they're doing it wrong. The question is, why are they doing it that way? And often there are good reasons, and sometimes things get lost in the translation of being trained and those types of things. But most of the time, it's not that. It didn't work the other way, and they don't really, they being executives, don't really perceive why they're doing it, other than this kind of black and white control aspect of, you're doing it wrong. So it's an important component to understand why people do things the way that they do. And finding out if people are going around saying better to ask for forgiveness than permission, to me, again, why do they have to ask for forgiveness? And why do because they know they're never going to get the permission that they need in order to maybe make necessary changes that are going on. So anyway, that's what I wanted to cover this week. And remember, there is always a better way.